This is the Miller Philosopher. So this is kind of a redo of an earlier video I did on the spectrum of women in Tolkien's Middle-earth. And the reason why I'm doing it is because this was a video that I really liked, and I just lately re-listened to it. And I'm like, you know what? I had just started the channel about this time, and I'm very forgiving of myself that it was pretty rough. The audio more or less sucked. And I'm glad that people liked it, apparently, but at the same time, it's one I really liked and that I felt very strongly about, so I wanted to redo it. But I also want to emphasize this is not going to be something I'm going to be doing with all of my earlier videos because there's just too many. And, I'm very honest about my progress and my evolution about these things, and I'd rather leave it up as an example of, when you start out on something, it's not always great, but you get better as time goes on, and I want to be honest with mistakes I've made and as well as the progress that I've made. So, having said that, the spectrum of women in Middle-earth is very vast and does not get enough credit, I feel, because a lot of people, especially after the movies came out, felt that Tolkien pigeonholed women into the role of princesses to be rescued or women to be married off or something along those lines. That even if they showed a spark of free will or agency, as we like to call it these days, that at some point, they kind of wise up and get married and settle down, and do the traditional wife thing. Now, I'm not going to shit on that because if people choose to do that or characters choose to do that, fine, great, whatever. People have their own wills and stuff like that. But that being said, that people saying that that's all Tolkien wrote about women really didn't read the literature. And that's not too surprising, to be honest, because the movies obviously because they're visual, can easily take the place of that. But even with that, there are many people who have read the books and they still feel that way. So I just wanted to briefly kind of go into examples of how vast the spectrum actually is, because Tolkien, with all of the majority of the characters and species that he writes in his books, they're not monolithic necessarily, with maybe the exception of the orcs, and even then that was questionable towards the end of his life, I think, because he was questioning that. But there isn't a monolithic stereotype of these peoples when it comes to personality traits. That being said, you can go back to the first age, because the first age is literally littered with this vast spectrum of women who are not all the same. So obviously you have Galadriel, okay, who is like the longest living being in Middle-earth, second longest living being in Middle-earth, in that universe, and how in the beginning she was young, she was ambitious, she had a bit of an attitude. And this is where I feel that when the Rings of Power show, as many problems as I had with that, one of the problems I didn't really have with it is that even if the time that they showed it I felt wrong, I did appreciate that they did show a Galadriel who was hot-headed, who was a Noldor through and through, with the exception of the black hair. But, her kind of mouthing off to everyone, everything is exactly more or less how I see first age Galadriel when she was younger and back in Valinor. And she was well known, besides her beauty and her strong perception, also for not trusting her uncle Thénor because she thought he was sus. And the two of them just did not get along. And that's just more or less a case of two alphas who were just like, just don't like each other. And in fact, the only reason that she goes back to Middle-earth is because even if she doesn't like him, the words that he says more or less are kind of true. And it sparks that fire in her that, yeah, she wants to see more of the world. And she does feel kind of caged up in Valinor and et cetera, and she wants more. She wants more out of life, I guess you could say. And so she goes after it. And she's noted as one of the leaders of the rebellion. And to be fair, is like the only surviving leader of the rebellion, period. That's a very strong point as well, to the point of spectrum, in that Yes, by the time of the third age and everything, she's a lot wiser. She seems a lot more chill, and maybe if you want to argue more traditional, but understand it, this was coming after God knows how long, how many millennia of tragedy. The last of her family left alive, the last of the leaders, the original leaders of the Noldor Rebellion left alive. That's heavy. That is some heavy shit. You can tell in the writings and in the movies, I think too, that this took a toll. So there's nuance there. You also have Galadriel's cousin, Aradhel, who maybe you haven't heard of her, but she is the daughter of Fingolfin, which Feanor's half brother, and how she was just as rebellious. She wasn't one of the leaders, but she was well known for doing what she wasn't supposed to be doing, basically. So, like, for example, she was friends and very close with the sons of Feanor, even though the rest of her family couldn't stand them. And even back in Middle-earth, she was like, I want to go see them. And her brother, Turgon's just like, no, you're not, because they're fucking crazy, which is true. But I guess at that time, so was Aradhel, and she disobeys him, and we all know how that turns out, which is basically strange. And I'll probably do a separate video on that in the future. But so you have her, right? You have Morwen, who was the wife of Hurin, who, yes, it kind of comes off as kind of a little bit more traditional. She gets married, she has kids, whatever. But her background is tragic. She being a refugee from a fallen kingdom, having seen a lot of horrible and kind of grotesque things, and having survived that, one of the few survivors, because she left her homeland for safety, leaving almost every male of her family members that she knew and was still living at the time, left them all behind to die because that was her choice. And how that affected her, how she became very cold and was known for being very steely and just being not a very friendly person, and that she wasn't the greatest mother, quite honestly, but she loved her kids. So you have character there. You also have Haleth, who was the leader of one of the tribes of the Edain, one of the 3 tribes of men that migrated into Beleriand during the series of wars at that time, and how she became leader because she lost her father and brother fighting orcs, basically, and her people were just kind of getting slaughtered and everything, and she was the one who held them steadfast so that they survived, and survived the first stage and so on, and became ancestors of the Numenorians. And how strong-willed she was, that to the point where she flat out rejected the assistance of one of the elf lords who had saved her people, because she was known for being very strong-willed, and so strong-willed, in fact, that she refused to marry. So she never married, she never had kids. So if you're one of those people who's just kind of like, you don't need a man, to be happy, whatever, there's your hero right there. So there's your first age characters right there. In the second age, okay, you have the many queens of Numenor. Okay, Numenor being the highest, I don't even call them race or species or whatever, but for lack of better words, the highest race of humanity to exist in that universe. And being led by, at times by queens, high queens, many of them being well noted to be very wise, and all of them being very powerful. But even a spectrum within that, some of them not necessarily getting along with their husbands and having issues with that. Others, again, being forced to submit under unfortunate circumstances, which is the case of the last Queen of Numenor, and therefore getting caught up in its fall because of that. But there's a spectrum there, but at the same time, they're still noted because it plays out later, millennia later, in the Third Age, when Arnor is having their issues with Gondor, and they're fighting, not fighting, but arguing with each other over one of their princes trying to claim rulership of Gondor and Arnor, because all of Gondor's kings are now dead. And yeah, I think they were all dead at that point. I'm not quite sure, but there was that kind of situation, and Gondor, being a highly traditionalist society, was just like, no, we're not going to do that. Even if we are all Numenorians, we're not doing that. And the prince, though it's for personal and political reasons, points out legally that, since we're all from Numenor, it is by the traditions of our people that the women of our people can rule. And it turns out that his wife is a princess from Gondor. So by that right, if you want to be really technical about it, by that right, his wife should be queen. She is the one who should have been ruling. So I guess you can argue, there might be some issues there, but you see his point that the legacy of the ruling women of Numenor still plays out into the future and into later ages, up into Aragorn, because that's how he ends up claiming the throne of Gondor. That is his legal papers, I guess you can say, for being allowed to claim the throne of Gondor. So in the movies, because it's worth saying this, that a lot of women, I would have thought, would have liked the portrayal of Eowyn, because that is the obvious kind of argument. She takes on the Witch King, right? She disobeys her father and rides into battle, and participates in the glory, you want to call it that, of the Battle of Pelennor Fields. Okay, I would have thought that she would have been a hero, and to many women she is for that. But like I said earlier, the fact that she renounces war and chooses to live a peaceful life with her husband, Faramir, a lot of women felt that was kind of a betrayal somehow. And there's a lack of understanding that of her personality and her character, that she wasn't about that. This is movie Eowyn I'm referring to right now. That, she was looking to be validated, essentially, and was not being validated, not maliciously, mind you, but at the same time not being validated by the people in society, even her own family. Okay? And therefore, she made an agency choice of going into battle against the will of the king. And she gets what she wants. And it nearly gets her killed. That's how she gains her reputation as being a notable warrior. And that gives her credibility among the people of Gondor and Rohan. But at the same time, she kind of realizes that ultimately not what she wanted. And she finds validation in Faramir, because Faramir is coming from a similar place. He's not looking to put her down, whatever like that, because he's coming from a similar situation where his father has never validated him since their mother died, which is not in the movies or anything like that, but it's in the books. So this wasn't a situation where Eowyn was downgrading, but a lot of people missed that. But despite that, Eowyn is preferred over kind of the biggest quote-unquote black eye of the Tolkien movies, which is Arwen. Now, Arwen can be a little bit controversial, I guess, because in the movies, the Two Tower movies in particular, what they were going to do was they were going to put her in that battle to be with Aragorn and fight beside him in order to emphasize their closest in relationship. And ultimately they chose not to, because the actress Liv Tyler, as well as the producers, felt that, quote, Arwen didn't need a sword to establish herself as, her relationship with Aragorn. And she didn't need a sword, basically, to establish herself as who she was, which is why I think she was portrayed as being this rebellious daughter to her father. And while it's not necessarily in the books, there is a basis for that, in that it very much mirrors, I think, Luthien, her ancestor, both her and Aragorn's ancestor, but their ancestor, who that was her relationship with her father. How movie Arwen relates to Elrond is how book Luthien relates to Thingol. Okay? So there's some respect there, and it just kind of, I guess, it just borrowed that aspect of that. But even with that, she is kind of looked down upon for not being on the front lines. Whatever criticism they had with Eowyn, at least Eowyn was on the front line and fighting and wanted to fight and whatever. Arwen's just basically staying back home, kind of, wishing on her husband or something like that or whatever. Her lover, Aragorn. So it was seeming like to them that she was just kind of weak and submissive and having zero agency. And that's not the case, because, again, in the books, even though she's barely mentioned, except in the appendices, which makes up for that, mind you, at least to some people. But if you take all that into account, that not only is she one of the main motivations for Aragorn doing what he did, but she is the reason why Frodo was allowed to go to Valinor at the end of Return of the King, because she forfeits her, I guess you could say, her biological right as an elf to go to Valinor, and gives it to Frodo. So basically, Frodo gets a free ticket. Basically, she gave Frodo her ticket, basically. And that is a major sacrifice, because she is choosing, ultimately, not like a bad end, but a very sad and tragic end, because she dies alone, because the nature of humanity and the elves and everything. An elf can die of grief, extreme grief, and that's, I guess, what's happened to her. She chooses that fate out of love for Aragorn, and that is a major sacrifice, because that allows their line, as well as the line of their ancestors, to continue into the future. It's a huge sacrifice that, to Tolkien, is huge, but to us these days, it's just like, if the satisfaction and the gratification is not immediate, then it ain't worth it. And a lot of people really sleep on that, and I think it's really sad that that's the case, but it is what it is. But all that to say that there is a huge spectrum in Middle-earth of women, different types of women, what they do and what their legacy is and whatnot. Yes, some of them do turn out to be traditional people, but others do not. And more of them are somewhere in between, which in reality is how a lot of people are. Everyone's kind of somewhere in between, rather than strictly one faction or another. But regardless of all that, what do you guys think? Do you think that women are underportrayed in Tolkien stories? Do you think that they should be shown more, especially with Rings of Power? Because that Rings of Power, having already established that, they're going to be making certain changes to bring in more viewers, because money. Do you feel that they should be doing more, louder, more active, whatever? Either way, let me know in the comments below. But this is the Middle-earth Philosopher, and you guys have a good day.